This is your weekly tech recap with Jamal Abbott. News and insights about the tech world in plain English. Thank you for listening. You've reached episode number 8, and we have quite a bit of information coming from quarterly earnings results. So in this episode, we're going to hear more about Sprint's network update, some information regarding Verizon's technology milestone, news about CenturyLink's transformation and challenges, and then 100,000 5G subscribers in South Korea. Finally, Q&A. This week, Sprint recently completed their quarterly earnings call, and they've provided some more information about what's going on with their network and the direction of their company. So Sprint has been working to become more efficient as they lack the capital and the resources needed to compete against larger carriers, those larger carriers being AT&T and Verizon. At the same time, they're still hopeful about the merger with T-Mobile as they wait for this to go through with the federal government. In the meantime, they have used digital transformation techniques to help them fill some resource gaps. And then they've also looked to leverage techniques such as artificial intelligence and virtual agents to handle some of their customer service issues over the internet, as well as cut back on some of their promotional marketing activities as they look to be a little bit more efficient with their spending. What they did announce during this earnings call is that they will be deploying 5G in 9 cities, some of those coming up here in the next coming weeks, as well as some additional cities scheduled later on for June. With these 5G deployments, it's expected that over 1,000 square miles will be covered with service. One of the interesting things that came from the earnings call was one of the questions that came from an analyst, and it was asking about what would happen if the merger doesn't go through with T-Mobile. And then coming from Sprint's CEO, and he basically stated that if this merger doesn't go through, they'll have to look to reposition the company, and some of that may look like them actually becoming less of a national carrier and then moving to a regional role where they focus in on serving specific geographic areas in the United States, as well as some other activities to reposition the company and what they can provide to the market. So I found this earnings call pretty interesting, and the one thing that came to mind to me was the Michael Phelps meme. I know this is a little weird, but if you've seen this meme, there's a meme of Michael Phelps that's swimming, and there's another guy that's in the other lane that has his head turned over to either the right or left, looking at Michael Phelps. The reason why I bring this one up is because AT&T and Verizon were brought up several times during this earnings call, whereas on the other calls that I've listened to with the two companies that were mentioned, they don't mention anything about their competitors. So to me, it feels like Sprint is looking ahead to see what the competition is doing, and they're spending less time really focusing in on their vision and what they have to offer to the customers and then to potential customers out there in the market. I'm not naive to the fact that they're trying to position themselves in the most realistic light so that way they can merge with T-Mobile, but it just looks like to me that they're definitely on a defensive position and not moving in the offensive position as T-Mobile and as Verizon and as AT&T are doing with their service and their offerings. Some of that too has to do with not having the capital, not having the resources. And I think some of that also too is just the fact that they're just not aggressive. One thing I want to back up and then explain a little bit more, I think this is important to give you a little bit more value from this particular story, is the fact that they're using digital transformation. So what exactly is digital transformation? So that's really a process where they're looking to improve some of the business processes they're currently using and then having that enhanced by technology. So for instance, with the use of customer service agents. So when you employ a customer service agent, you obviously have to pay them. They get tired, and they may not be the most efficient resource, especially if that person is coming in and then leaving a short time later. So what they're doing is replacing some of those agents or augmenting some of those in-person agents, and then using actual artificial intelligence, chatbots, things of that nature to help them out with some of the requests that come in online for customers needing probably simple requests like, hey, I forgot my password, or how do I do this, or how do I do that? And then they've actually increased this number by 30%, and it's providing some additional value as they're leaning down and as they're trying to find ways to do more with less. So digital transformation is something that is happening out there, and it's one of the movements that are affecting businesses. And then you'll see more examples of this, and hopefully more examples that we can bring to this show. But Sprint's definitely leveraging the digital transformation technologies to their advantage as they look to become more efficient with the little resources that they have right now. That's what I've noticed about Sprint. They're definitely building a case for the merger, and they don't seem to have their eyes completely focused on what they can do and what they can offer to the market. They do, but they still have their sights set on AT&T and Verizon, and they're paying attention closely to what they're doing. At least that's the message I got from the earnings call. And we'll see what happens. So if this goes through, then these two companies can combine together and become that third powerful player to compete against the other two big dogs out there in this market. If they don't, then they'll definitely have to reposition themselves, pivot, and then try to find a different identity if this merger doesn't go through. So more to come as we watch closely with this story. This next story talks about Verizon's technology milestone. So bear with me here. There's going to be quite a few different acronyms and some technology that we'll have to break down in this one. So here we go. Verizon was able to virtualize some baseband functions. So baseband functions are components of a radio access network. So these are like the towers. These are the cell sites that you and I connect to with our cell phones, and this is what allows our cell phones to communicate with the central part of these telecom networks. So Verizon was able to virtualize some of these functions. With this virtualization, this allowed for common off-the-shelf components, so hardware like servers, like standard hard drives, things of that nature. Those components could be used in this network, and that allows for greater flexibility as well as speed for deploying mobile networks. Commercial off-the-shelf hardware or common off-the-shelf hardware, that can be like a computer instead of having like a dedicated box made specifically for cell phone type functions. With these steps, this also allows for the further development of multi-access edge computing, or MEC for short, and network slicing. Okay, let's break this down real quick. So let's go back real quick. Once again, commercial or common off-the-shelf hardware. So like I talked about, so servers, computers, using standard components that you and I can go to any type of market, Amazon, Newegg, or even Best Buy, or even Fry's. That type of hardware is being utilized in these mobile networks. Now, before this, what the telecom vendors, these other mobile companies, and then even other companies in general, they were using custom hardware that was designed for a specific purpose and function. The hardware and software for these components are super tight together. So if the hardware becomes obsolete or the software becomes obsolete, you have to replace the whole thing, and then that ends up causing some delays and just further interruptions for the service providers. The trend right now in technology is to break up the software and the hardware functions. And then when this does happen, it just allows for easier upgrades to occur, as well as for quicker response for these telecom companies and these other technology companies to respond to customer needs. And then typically when this happens, the hardware gets replaced with just generic commercial hardware or common off-the-shelf hardware, and then the software is usually centralized in the cloud. Not only is that software just centralized in the cloud, but that software not only controls one box, but it controls like several boxes at a time or several servers at a time. So there's just a lot more efficiencies when you remove the software and hardware from being tightly joined together like that. It's huge. It's happening in the industry. And this is something that Verizon is looking to take the lead on as they move out there to deploy these 5G networks, and then look for ways to streamline the deployment of these networks and take advantage of some new capabilities. The next term I wanted to define once again is MEC, or multi-access edge computing. So MEC is a process where the computing power is moved closer to the edge of the network. And then so we'll go into just a little bit more detail about this as well too. So there's been a trend for computers, we'll just start with computers here real quick, where the processing power and then the software, the operating system, has moved from the devices locally then now out to the cloud. The only problem with moving the power of the software and then some of these other processes to the cloud is that sometimes there can be a delay for me using my laptop and then connecting to like a cloud environment, and then me having to deal with a delay if I'm trying to access a file or if I'm trying to run some type of application directly from the cloud directly to my laptop. So what the industry has decided is that said, you know what, instead of us hosting all these applications in the cloud, we're actually going to bring those applications and that computing power closer to the user's network. So we're not going to put it back directly in the network because it's not efficient for us as a service provider to have to manage multiple instances of applications, of hardware, and then other types of resources like that. But it's a little bit easier for us to manage that in an edge type situation. So the edge could be some type of data center, or it could be like a radio access network that has these resources pretty close to where the users are located at. And then when that happens, one or two things happens. The users will get a speed increase because it doesn't take that much time for them to access the data or the resources because they're pulling from an area that's closest to them instead of going to a centralized server in a different part of the country or maybe in a different part of the world. The other thing that happens too is that the latency, or the time that it takes to move data across this type of network, that also drops as well too. And because of these enhancements, this has allowed Verizon to test and to cut in half the latency expected for these types of applications in this virtualized environment. And then that's needed for future technologies that are coming, like driverless cars, like some other type of applications that require low latency, like maybe me being a doctor and I need to operate in somebody in California. I need low latency if I'm going to do some type of remote operation. So remote operations aren't here yet, but we're just giving you an example of what that would look like if I needed some low latency. So it's probably a good idea for me to be able to move and to operate this remote operation in almost real time and not have any delay when somebody's being operated on. So that's an example of why you would need low latency for that. So once again, that's MEC, and that's multi-access edge computing. And that's literally the act of putting processing power and then applications closer to the user's networks without actually having them deployed in the user's networks. And then another term that came up in this article from Verizon is this term called network slicing. So I had to look this one up because it sounded a little goofy to me. And then network slicing is a fancy term for dedicating a portion of a wireless network to a specific function. So that could be like cutting a slice of the network and then dedicating that piece to mobile user traffic, and then cutting another portion of the network out and then dedicating that traffic for Internet of Things type of traffic. So there's going to be some other use cases where the mobile companies or maybe even the customers themselves are saying, you know what, I need some traffic for this function, I need some traffic for this application, and I need some general traffic for the rest of my users connected to the network. So that is going to be reality with these 5G networks coming online, and it's something that I'm finding super fascinating and I'm following, and that's the reason why I brought the story up, because it's something that is important to all of us, which is speed. When we have speed, we make quicker decisions, and then we make better decisions with the speed. And then also, once again, too, these next generation of technologies need the speed in order to operate and to be able to function fully without endangering the lives of the individuals that actually need to depend on these technologies. So I am super excited about this, and I am learning a lot more about edge computing, or MEC, and then I can't wait to see what this looks like in real operation. So Verizon's making some moves, and they're making some milestones with MEC, and this all starts with virtualizing portions of the network. This next story involves CenturyLink and the challenges they're facing with technology. So for those who are unfamiliar with CenturyLink, CenturyLink is the third largest wireline telephone provider or telecommunications provider in the United States. And then on a recent earnings call, they highlighted the fact that they are definitely losing revenue in some of their core products. The telco themselves are also in the midst of a digital transformation, and they're also looking to diversify their offerings. And then you can kind of see some of this happening as they're partnering with some of these cloud providers. So for instance, they have expanded a partnership with Google Cloud, and they've also gotten some recent expertise with Amazon Web Services. Also with CenturyLink, they have looked into the fixed wireless access, and we'll be looking to deploy those services sometime in the near future. And this is something that's really interesting because it's a sign of the telco diversifying their efforts and providing services to customers. And this is really important because with the traditional phone companies, they largely made their money on providing voice services, so telephone services, local and long distance types of services. But all that started to change when the internet came, and then when we started to do things like use technologies like voice over IP. So that's really one of the technologies that allowed us to use and make phone calls over the internet, bypassing the traditional phone companies. And then, users are no longer having to pay long distance calls from here to New York, because they can make that same type of call over the internet. The other thing that's affecting the telephone companies is the fact that we are more connected more than ever, and there's other technologies out there that allow us to make phone calls, make video calls, and the quality is far superior compared to a traditional phone call. So social media platforms, messaging platforms, things of that nature, those are all components that are putting pressure on the telephone companies, and it's causing consumers to ditch landlines completely. And then it's also causing just not needing the telephone company for some of these types of functions, especially when it comes to communicating. So in response to this, the telephone companies have to find ways to add value to the users. And then for the most part, they've done this by providing internet services. So there's no doubt about it. We need these phone companies and we need these cable companies for internet services. And I mean, the internet is the basis of how we communicate with the rest of the world. This is where all the social media applications live at, all on the internet. So they're making money from the internet by providing internet-based services, but the traditional services such as telephone and even TV, they're not making money from that any longer. With that being said, this is causing alarm for the investors, and they're starting to wonder, what CenturyLink is going to be doing as the next couple steps. Will they be able to make money and be profitable at some point in time with all these changes happening? One article I read, it was almost suggesting too that maybe CenturyLink may need to shed a couple of business functions so they can focus and then be able to get back to a level of profitability. So this story is interesting once again too, because it just highlights the fact that these telephone companies are in the midst of a transformation and they're having to respond to all sorts of various challenges. And then, not even to, or I didn't even mention the fact here too that there's going to be clearly some challenges that these traditional phone companies have. If they don't have a wireless component to their business, they're going to face some pressures as these 5G networks come online, and then you have companies like an AT&T and Verizon that can provide a home-based internet connection that's going to compete with the traditional connection that comes from underground through the wires and then connects directly to a house or to a business. In addition to the challenges with wireless, they also have to keep in mind too that there's an emerging technology called Unified Communications as a Service, or UCaaS for short, and that's also digging at the business side of voice services, where businesses and other organizations are able to get their voice services directly from the cloud over an existing internet connection. And that's also another element that CenturyLink and these other phone companies have to take into consideration as they're competing for business in today's market. So they're going to have to find some ways to stay competitive, find some ways to diversify, and then find some other ways to stay relevant. So a lot of pressure on these companies to deliver, and then they have a lot of legacy technologies that they're responsible for, and it's just a lot for them to deal with and to stay competitive in an era today that depends on speed, flexibility, and agility. So I'm keeping my eye on this one, and we'll see how CenturyLink responds here in the next weeks and months ahead as they try to navigate through some of these challenges. If you listen to this show for a while, you notice that we talk a lot about 5G. And I'm super excited. I'm super pumped up about what 5G is, its capabilities, and how it's going to change our lives. I look at this 5G technology as really how the telephone changed the world by enabling people to communicate with one another simply by picking up the phone and then calling over long distances. And then, so with that being said, we still haven't seen 5G yet, at least out here in the United States. And there's lots of questions out there if, 5G is even real. Was it coming? Has anybody had 5G? And then we've also seen some of these use cases, real world use cases, to where the 5G signal is not all that strong, or it's just confined to a limited area. So we're really wondering, okay, is this 5G stuff really for real? Like, Jamal, you talk about it all the time. Is this really going to happen? Who's really going to get 5G if it's nowhere to be found anywhere? Is this thing even anywhere out there? I have an answer for you. And this next story talks about how in South Korea, 5G is real out there. And guess how real it is? Over 100,000 subscribers have jumped on 5G, according to KT Corporation. So KT Corporation is a telecom corporation that launched 5G services back in April of this year, so April of 2019, and they reached over 100,000 subscribers for 5G services. So this is amazing because this company was able to reach this scale mainly because they were able to get the network out to the masses for the most part. Once again, be reminded that the size of South Korea is not as big as compared to the United States, which covers several thousand miles. And I believe that the size of South Korea is probably about the equivalent of one of our states out here in the United States. So it's not really a large area, but we're not going to discount them. They got it out there for the nation, and 5G services is up and running. The one interesting question that came up from the KT Corporation's earnings call was that, is the company prepared for the sudden burst of traffic that's going to be coming with users on 5G? KT Corporation responded and said that they're ready and they're well prepared for the expected burst of user traffic that's going to be coming from these 5G networks, and they're going to be our example. I mean, here in the United States, we're nowhere near we're nowhere near ready for countrywide 5G services from coast to coast. We're not ready yet. So once again, too, we're in the very early stages of 5G being deployed in the United States. There's only a handful of cities from most of these carriers, but they're looking to get the 5G deployed the rest of 2019, and then 2020 is supposed to be the year that it's really booming and popping for 5G services. But in South Korea, if you're out that way, you got it. You got a 5G capable phone, and then that country is going to be something that I'm keeping an eye on, because we're going to see some use cases that come from that area. We'll probably see some businesses use 5G to solve specific problems, or maybe even see some consumers come up with some ideas on how they can use 5G to impact their lives or provide some services that we haven't even thought of yet. So 5G is real. 100,000 subscribers have used it or are using it in South Korea right now as we speak, and I am keeping my eye on them. Okay, we have made it to the QA portion of this show, and then if you want to ask me a question, you have a couple different ways that you can reach me. One way is social media, so you can hit me up on Quora, you can hit me on Twitter, you can hit me on Instagram, Facebook, you name it. Hit me there, shoot me a question. I'll be happy to answer it on the show. If you want to shoot me an email, the email address is Jamal@thephoneguy, and that's THA, don't forget the A, THA phoneguy.com. So Jamal@thephoneguy.com. Shoot me an email. I'd be happy to answer this question on the show. This first question comes from Kitty, and she wants to know what makes Sprint an unreliable phone carrier. So this one's interesting because we just heard earlier in the show about some of the challenges that Sprint has with providing services. And I wouldn't say that they are an unreliable carrier, but this is only from my perspective. And this is where I'm at here in Las Vegas, where we have pretty much good phone service from all four of the largest carriers in the United States. And I've personally had no problems using Sprint services out here. So it works pretty well for me, and it's one of the reasons why I haven't switched. But what would make Sprint unreliable is that if they are unable to deliver on their promise of providing service in your local area, if you're happening to use the phone and you're constantly getting drop calls, that would definitely make them an unreliable carrier. If you're counting on your phone or your mobile hotspot to provide internet services for you, and then it's either spotty or maybe unavailable most of the times, that can be an issue, and then paint in your mind that them being an unreliable carrier. The only question that I would have about their ability to be unreliable carrier is that if you're traveling to different parts of the United States. So that part I don't really have a question or I don't have an answer for. I know personally when I traveled here recently, I was using Sprint service in some different backwoods and mountains areas. It was definitely tough for me to get a signal. But on my Verizon work phone, I was able to get a pretty decent signal in some of these places where I didn't have a good signal with the Sprint service. So it's all gonna depend on where you're at, and then what current problems you're experiencing with your service right now for this to be unreliable from your vantage point and from your experience. But your mileage is definitely going to vary depending upon how well the service works in your area, and then how well they have invested in your area or in the surrounding areas with their network, and then how strong that signal is in your area. But we do know that Sprint has had issues with providing coverage to their service areas, or maybe to some of their surrounding service areas. So just keep in mind those points that I listed out, And then, so just keep those points in mind that I pointed out. And then ultimately, you'll have to make the decision for yourself if they're unreliable or if you need to find somebody else to meet your needs when it comes to your cell phone service. This next question comes from Hassan, and he asks, why are the prices for telecom services so expensive in North America and so much cheaper in the Middle East and South Asia? So this is actually a good question. And for the second part of this question, I'm not familiar with how services are priced in the Middle East and South Asia, since I've never lived there or I've actually had to purchase or manage telecom services in that part of the world. I can speak for the North America part, specifically in the United States, especially since that's where I'm currently based out of. And I believe the main reason why prices are higher in this part of the world is because of the current structure that we have with competition. My understanding in parts of Europe, I believe, is that they actually have more choices to choose from when it comes to internet services. I think I was reading somewhere where you can like do a search and then you can kind of price and see who's the best internet provider for you and then activate that service based upon that request. I'll have to dig into this more now that I'm thinking about this, just to make sure that I'm actually correct on that inquiry. But specifically in the United States, you're limited to who's providing services in your neck of the woods. And then with that competition being low in these local areas, the prices are generally going to be higher because there's not going to be a whole lot of pressure to provide competitive prices. So we have some level of competition. So I'll speak specifically here in Las Vegas. We have the cable provider out here. Then we have the telecom provider. And there are some wireless choices out there, but I don't, in my opinion, I don't think they're that much of a actual threat speed-wise and then even pricing-wise to be really considered as a choice when the cable companies typically have the higher speeds and then the telecom companies out here are somewhere in the middle of the road from my personal experiences. Competition is going to dictate how competitive the prices are going to be, and since we can't choose from any number of providers, we're stuck with the cable company and then the telecom company, and then maybe, if we want to get with the wireless carriers like an AT&T or a Sprint, I mean, you can choose that, but we even have some limitations because they have caps on how much data you can consume in a monthly service plan. So we're limited. The prices go up. If we have more choices, the prices will go down because everybody that's going to be providing those type of services, they want to get your dollars, and there's incentive in the market to provide the best possible service at the prices that make that make the most sense for them, and then therefore the prices stay lower because of that. So that may be the case out there in the Middle East and South Asia. I would love to learn more about that. So if you can give me that information and enlighten me, I'll report back on the next episode. So thanks for the question. I really appreciate it. This next question comes from Deborah, and she asks, why do kiosks not seem to satisfy customers? Could it be because people like customer service? So this is an interesting question, and I believe that people don't like kiosks only because they don't want to deal with the hassle of a kiosk. Now, those people, though, it all depends on how tech savvy they are or how much friction this kiosk is going to introduce to their experience as they're getting ready to check out or they're getting ready to make a transaction. So I can give you an example, a couple of different examples of kiosks that I've used. So at the grocery store, and then most recently I went to McDonald's. I haven't been to McDonald's in some years, but I went to McDonald's here recently where we had the kiosks. And then for the most part, the kiosks, it worked for me. But, once again, too, I don't mind getting in there. I don't mind touching and then looking at my choices on that screen, making a decision, being able to check out, and then go on my way. There's some people out there that don't want to work with a kiosk. They want somebody to look at They want that person to take their order or to confirm their choices, and they're just more comfortable with that. So some of the older generations typically want to have that person doing the transaction for them. And then some of the younger generations, they actually don't mind working with the technology, working with the kiosks. And then so that's like the yin and the yang to this thing with the kiosks. So it all depends on who the person is, how tech savvy they are, and then how much of an interruption is this for their experience as they're getting ready to check out. So if these kiosks were not as helpful, and then it just caused a lot of pain and friction like I've seen in the grocery stores, yeah, I probably want to bypass that and then just have somebody check that out for me, especially if I'm in the grocery store and I got 50 items I need to check out. I personally don't want to check out all those items, and I know that the person working in the store is a lot quicker at scanning those items because they do that on a more regular and consistent basis than I would be doing on my own as I'm going to the grocery store. So it all depends on the individuals. And then I would say it all depends on how much friction that kiosk is going to be introducing into that customer experience. So you're going to get more adoption if the experience is easy. And then also too, I'd be remiss if I didn't say this, education. How well are these customers being educated on how to use the kiosk? So one thing I did notice about in an example of the McDonald's and in the grocery store, there's an attendant there, and they show this person how to scan, how to use the touchscreen, how to use the kiosk, so that way they can check things out and then go on their way. So if there's more training for these users, then you're probably going to have more success for them to be using and interacting more with these kiosks. But it's going to be some time. I mean, if you think about it in the grand scheme of things, these kiosks have been around for a short period of time, and there's always been somebody that's been either manually checking out or taking orders on that person's behalf. So it's just going to take a little time before this catches on, but I don't think it's a customer service thing. I just think that it's more of an experience thing that's causing people to bypass the kiosk altogether and go directly to a live person. Well, that's it for the show today. I really appreciate your time and attention, and I hope you got a lot of value out of this show. Any questions, comments, or concerns, definitely hit me up. Let me know. And if you want to leave a review for the show, feel free to do that. Give me your feedback, and then I can make some improvements, make some adjustments, and I'm here for you. So I really appreciate you for listening here today, and I will talk to you soon. Have a great and amazing day.